culmination of academic Hinduphobia can be looked at in terms of the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference that happened in August of 2021 on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Now, you can say a lot of things about Hindus or Hindutva or whatever you like, but we had nothing to do with 9/11. And that date, the choosing of that date was very interesting. 50 plus universities, US, Canada, and India got together to sponsor a conference which really kind of trashed Hindu practices, Hindu figures, Hindu deities. And speaker after speaker said that, Hinduism and Hindutva are sort of indistinguishable, and so why don't we dismantle both? And this was particularly ironic because the conference had been held over the protests of Hindus in US and Canada. And the universities had constantly assured us that, look, this is not an attack on a religion, it's a discussion of a political ideology, aka Hindutva. And unfortunately, there was no price that they paid. They're all still working, happily in their jobs. They've got promotions.
Namaste, all the Sangam Talks viewers. Today we gather for an important discussion on a topic that demands our attention and understanding, that is Hinduphobia. Far beyond being a mere political term, Hinduphobia represents a deeply rooted issue that has persisted for centuries and evolving through different manifestations over time. To truly comprehend the essence of Hinduphobia, we must delve into its historical roots. It's not a fictitious concept, but rather a contemporary manifestation of a discrediting narrative that has been pushed against Hinduism since the era of colonization. As we explore this phenomenon, it becomes evident that Hindu phobia is not an isolated incident. Instead, it is a continuum of prejudices and biases that have shaped the perception of Hinduism and its adherents in the Western society. Our speaker today is Pushpita ji. She is a distinguished board member of the Coalition of Hindus of North America. CONA is a leading organization which is focused on advocacy and education on behalf of Hindus in Canada and USA. She will guide us through the nuanced layers of Hinduphobia. Through her insights, we aim to understand the threads that connect historical biases, colonial narratives, and modern instances of discrimination which continue till today against Hindus in Western society. Let us engage in this dialogue with an open mind and a commitment to understand the intricacies of Hinduphobia, recognizing it as a genuine and impactful challenge that demands our collective attention and efforts to address. Without further ado, I invite Pushpita ji to share her insights on this critical subject.
Namaste. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here at Sangam Talks, talking about this very important topic of Hinduphobia. Many people are familiar, but many people are not familiar with this concept of Hinduphobia. We've all heard about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, but even many Hindus are unfamiliar with the concept. And I think it's very important for all of us to understand what this term means and how it actually defines our experiences, our lived experiences today, whether that's in India or in diaspora communities across the world. Given my background as being on the board of the Coalition of Hindus of North America, CONA, my examples are obviously going to be more focused on what happens in the West. But I think everything that I'm saying, you would find a parallel example, even unfortunately, right here in India. So let's get going. Many of you think or have heard that Hinduphobia is a political term, it doesn't really exist. And so let's start with the history of this term. The favorite allegation made against Hinduphobia is that it's a new term, it's a political term. And I think I always like to start with some history. And for this, we have to thank researcher Sarah Louise Gates, who actually discovered that the first usage of the word Hinduphobia is as far back as 1883 in a New York newspaper, and your readers can look at it. So this is definitely not a new term. This is definitely not a political term that has come up to support any current or recent political dispensation. It's an old problem. Hindu phobia is actually an old problem. And there are a couple of fascinating handles that I would recommend people follow. There's one called Hindu History. And here in the United States, you can actually find the Library of Congress archives all the publications ever published. So this wonderful Twitter handle called Hindu History went and looked at a lot of the coverage of Hindus and Indians from about 120 years ago in the United States and other parts of the West. And you can see the fascinating way that we are covered. And honestly, not that much is different even today. You'll find these scary headlines about Oriental mystics are gathering for an invasion of America. The co-option of the word Jagannath Yatra and how it became into this word Juggernaut, that is evidence of Hindu phobia, how a very sacred Hindu tradition was taken and corrupted into a word that means the exact opposite of the benign and beautiful and spiritual and blissful experience that the Jagannath Yatra is. And, violence against Hindus and terrible coverage about Hindus is not new, as you can see, because as far back as 1907, there were Bellingham riots in what is today the Washington, Seattle area. And mobs actually drove Hindus from settlements where they used to live, and they were very proud of it. So Hindu phobia is not an old new problem, and don't let anybody tell you that or shame you into thinking that this is a made-up issue. So, like everything, let's start about defining this term. And we don't need to do that. Academics have done that job for us. There is a website called understandinghinduphobia.org. And this is the definition that they came up with in April of 2021 when they did a conference at Rutgers, defining it as a set of antagonistic, destructive, and derogatory attitudes and behaviors towards Sanatan Dharma Hinduism and Hindus that may manifest as prejudice, fear, or hatred. The website is pretty detailed. I encourage everyone to look at it. It gives a lot of examples on what might be considered Hindu phobia. And I think some of it is obvious. Like if somebody comes up to you and tries to hit you saying you dirty Hindu, that is obviously Hindu phobia, and very few would deny it. When a mandir gets attacked and murtis get broken, that is obviously hatred against Hindus. But I think it's also important to remember that Hindu phobia is a lot of things that are not so obvious. So, for example, and this happens a lot when you have academics that deny that Hindus have faced any systemic persecution, that is a form of Hindu phobia. If you try to conflate Indian political issues and make that a Hindu problem, that is a form of Hindu phobia. Erasure of our colonial experience, many other things. I'm not going to go through the list, but I think these are important because I think all of us can relate to people who throw, things like sati or caste or, cows or bhakt or all of these terms that we're very familiar with. And again, all we are doing here is using these, and the academics have used these in a way and used the same paradigms that the world has accepted for Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and said, hey, we Hindus are not immune to it either, so it's important for all of us to understand. But let's get away from academics and sort of look at what this means for us in our day-to-day lives, because that is where most of us live. And, I think it's very important to start with the educational system because that is what shapes all of us very deeply. And every year, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of Indian students go from India to different universities, Australia, US, Canada, UK, wherever, right? And I don't think many of them realize the deeply biased environment that they're going into because unfortunately, academia has become a deep hotbed of Hindu phobia. And that this is a problem that has developed over the past 20, 50 years. I'm not going to go into that because that could be a standalone talk. But the culmination of academic Hindu phobia can be looked at in terms of the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference that happened in August of 2021 on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Now, you can say a lot of things about Hindus or Hindutva or whatever you like, but we had nothing to do with 9/11. And that date, the choosing of that date was very interesting. Dismantling global Hindutva can be looked upon as emblematic of some of the deep Hindu hate that pervades campuses. 50 plus universities, US, Canada, and India got together to sponsor a conference which really kind of trashed Hindu practices, Hindu figures, Hindu deities. And speaker after speaker said that, Hinduism and Hindutva are sort of indistinguishable, and so why don't we dismantle both? And this was particularly ironic because the conference had been held over the protests of Hindus in US and Canada. And the universities had constantly assured us that, look, this is not an attack on a religion, it's a discussion of a political ideology, aka Hindutva. But the speakers themselves showed it to be a plain attack on Hinduism. And unfortunately, there was no price that they paid. They're all still working, happily in their jobs. They've got promotions, grants, whatever. So it just shows you how common and deep Hinduphobia is. That you can do it, you actually get rewarded for it. And I think one critical thing to understand the difference between Hinduphobia and some of the other hates against community that we see is that it comes from the institutions. I talked about academia, it comes from media, it comes from the very groups who normally should be guarding against this kind of hate. And I think that is something that all Hindus need to be very aware of. I ask all students to be aware of it as they go and pursue their education in all the universities, the number of Indians who immigrate outside every year, working on H-1Bs and different kinds of places, you kind of need to know what you're walking into. And I think speaking of academia, right, I think right now we are all seeing what is playing on Western campuses with regard to the Israel-Palestine conflict. But I think it's also brought, and there's been a lot of focus now on how rampant anti-Semitism is on campuses. But if I would direct everybody to look at a paper that Professor Salvatore Babones published a couple of months ago, in which he pointed out the big overlap between the same players who push anti-Semitism, big overlap with those who push Hinduphobia. And you see that because in the university setup, basically, this sort of binary view has come to be adopted, where the world is divided into oppressors and the oppressed. And so once you're put in the oppressor or the oppressed category, logic doesn't matter, facts don't matter. If you're an oppressor, they actually don't care whatever happens to you. They say you deserve everything. And we're seeing that play out in the context of the anti-Semitic protests that are going on, where even the horrific violence that we saw on October 7th is justified on the grounds that, Israel or the Jews have been positioned as the oppressed. Diversity is really challenging these societies. So I think we're finding a lot of the teachers, they'll be putting, conflations between Kashmir and Palestine, or doing teach-ins about caste and Zionism and Hindutva. So everyone needs to really, because this is a growing problem, it's going to amplify unless we all start taking more actions. So no discussion on Hinduphobia would be complete without a quick glance at media. I know Sangam Talks is in a lot of work on this, and that could be another big topic. But I just wanted to share a few things that you might expect to see when you pick up some of the most respected publications in the Western world. So, at the top is a tweet that I think became infamous in India, but this was literally the correspondent of National Public Radio. And in the West, the National Public Radio is seen as, the epitome of diverse views and, the place which is very welcoming and open, but not so much for Hindus because they have correspondents who basically feel that, if India gives up Hinduism, it would solve all its problems. And her tweet referenced a lot of the, singular Hindu-phobic tropes that are used against us all the time. Dung worshipping, cow piss, all of the famous tropes that, all Hindus need to be aware of. No conversation on Hinduphobia would be complete without a passing reference to media. We're not going to study that today because that's a topic in its own. But I think if you look at the examples I'm sharing here from just the Western media, just a handful of them, it's really important to keep these in mind and see how the correspondents of very respected publications talk about Hindus, Hindu festivals, and the views they hold on Hinduism. And this is really important because most of us get information through the lens and the eyes of these correspondents. And, when these correspondents are so biased, as is obvious in the examples we're seeing here, you really have to start to question everything that they publish and they read. Some of the most egregious examples being from Furqan Khan, who was actually a correspondent for an as respected publication like the National Public NPR. And in the West, in the US, NPR is generally supposed to be where you go to listen to all the kind of hippie, feel good, respecting diversity. But as you can see, there's a huge problem with Hinduism, even among the folks that claim to respect diversity. And then we're in the brave new world. because we have the old media which has been discussed ad nauseum, but we have the new media, which is social media, which everyone is very familiar with, but also artificial intelligence and how that is going to shape our world in the days, months, and years to come. And as you can see, these are some snapshots that I'm sharing from ChatGPT when it launched in 2023. And you can already see the deep-seated bias that has been programmed into this AI engine, because when you ask this AI engine for a joke about, Hindu devis and devtas, it'll happily proffer you jokes on Hanuman, on Shivji, on any others. But when you want a joke on Muhammad or even Jesus, it gives you a very polite decline. So again, we could go on, but these are just emblematic of the deep-seated biases. And it's really unfortunate because, these are wonderful tools that we really are not going to be able to avoid using them. So we have to use them, but be aware, because this is how Hinduphobia works. You're using a platform or a paradigm or a tool itself that's not going to give you a fair shake. So it becomes a very hard task to achieve balance and equality. In understanding Hinduphobia, I think I mentioned that many academics and institutions have refused to accept the fact that Hinduphobia even exists. In fact, if any of you type Hinduphobia into Google or into your Microsoft Word, you'll get that little red squiggly, which means that the dictionaries and Microsoft and Google, despite being run by so-called Indian and Hindu CEOs, don't even accept that as a valid term. However, I think in this context, it's really important to be aware of a study that was published in 2022 by Rutgers University Network Contagion Research Institute. And this is I think the link should be here. Everyone should download it and read this study. It's not very long, just 20 pages. But it does a great job in analyzing this problem from an academic researcher's lens. And a quick backstory on NCRI. This is a group that just studies hate. That's their charter. So if you Google NCRI, you'll find them quoted a lot in terms of anti-Semitism, anti-Asian hate, anti-police violence, anti-vaccine violence. So it's ideology agnostic. They just study hate wherever they found it. And they happened to start studying hate against Hindus. And the lead researcher, Dr. Joel Finkelstein, was horrified at what he found. And you can Google his talks, but he was just shocked because he and his team, like many others, were not aware about the deep, deep well of Hinduphobia that exists. And their focus had been on online communities. So they looked at like 4chan, Twitter, and a whole bunch of other online social media platforms. And I think they were just taken aback with the deep, deep, deep levels of hatred against Hindus that they found. And I think that's what the report calls out. And I think a few things to take away from the main thing they found was how Hinduphobia sort of skates under the surface. Many times it's not very obvious. And there's a use of coded terms, imagery, and tropes, which are constantly used over and over again to sort of dehumanize and otherize Hindus. So when I read this report, the term Pajit jumped out. Once you realize it, you can't get away from it. Conflation with dirt, filth, cow dung, cow piss, pooping, all of these things. You hear these, you start to pick up these trends in many, many different places. And these are tropes that are used over and over again to make Hindus feel less than totally human. And so that, when something bad happens to Hindus as a human, you don't really respond because, you think they're dirty, filthy people. And when they wrote their report, if you don't have time to read the report, please read the foreword. It was written by the guy who was the Attorney General in New Jersey when Hindus were under attack with the Dotbuster gang. Dotbuster was quite literally a gang that was attacking Hindus for the bindi, the dot, and wanted to bust the head right there. And so this man was the Attorney General, meaning he was prosecuting the gangs and stuff. And he was shocked when he saw these findings. And he said, this is the deployment of that old hate in a new bottle. That's really what's happening here. And NCRI also warned that this kind of online hate, it's not just online. Like we can say, oh, it's all just virtual. How does it matter? No, it actually has impact on real life. And as we look at some of the stuff I'll talk about, they also mentioned, and we certainly agree, that Hinduphobia is, like I've said, dismissed, denied, or understudied in the public world. And there was a big conflation between Islamic networks, white nationalist networks, and other kinds of extremist networks. And they were increasingly using genocidal memes, tropes to spread Hindu phobia. And I'm going to talk, if you look at the, and again, I think as Professor Salvador Babones found out later, there is a popular use of anti Semitic tropes and imagery. In fact, this image that you guys can see here is actually a direct transfer of the Happy Merchant caricature that was used for Jews. But it's been updated for Hindus now, giving it a brown turban, a brown skin, and orange robes because, orange is our sacred color, or saffron is our sacred color. But here are some of the images that the NCRI report found. And you can see that they are like really raw and graphic. Some of these, as you know, the one below makes absolute sense immediately to our viewers in India. This is the iconic image of the 26/11 attacks with the Taj hotel on fire, the troops moving in to help. When we talk about coded imagery, this is an excellent example because I think you all remember this picture. It was just of the troops moving in and some people on the street. But in the images that are portrayed online, the troops have been given an Islamist makeover. And as a result, I found out that Peep the Frog is apparently being co-opted by both white nationalist and also Islamist supremacist networks. So you find that the cops have been given a makeover as the Islamist Peep the Frog. And the victims have been made to look very deliberately Hindu with the brown skin, the swastika, the saffron robes, the bindi or tilak. Whereas, in the Mumbai attacks, people of all faiths died. So this is how coded imagery and tropes work. And this is how people who know nothing about 26/11, you're really justifying that, these guys deserve to be killed because they're such wretched kind of subhuman beings. Similarly, the very iconic image of George Floyd being murdered by that killer cop. But George Floyd has been substituted for a Hindu. Again, you can see the swastika, tilak, or saffron robes, and the cop has been given an Islamist makeover. And the other one where you actually see the swastika and the Hakenkreuz both together with, a person wearing the Nazi sort of imagery, quite literally putting a gas mask on a person who has been made to look like a Hindu. So these are basically trying to inculcate death, genocidal violence, torture, and trying to normalize that whole thing. And this is the sort of Hindu phobia that you will find pervading very widely. So we've talked a lot about theory, and that is only interesting so far. People are like, well, I'm living my life happily as a Hindu. I don't know what you're talking about. I have a good life. I celebrate my festivals. I live life as a Hindu. But I think I always try to say, just because your house hasn't been burgled doesn't mean that burglaries don't happen. And so if you have not personally faced Hindu phobia, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I want to share a few examples of people who thought like most Hindus do. And so here is a little tweet that I want to share. This is a tweet put out by NASA, the very famous research organization. And they put it out in July of 2021. I just ask everyone to take a look at it and see, is there anything here that could annoy people? Certainly NASA didn't think so. But this tweet triggered and caught the attention of the extremely Hindu-phobic professor Ashok Swain, who apparently was triggered just by seeing this girl in the corner who is seated at her home office with some murtis on her desk. And he put out a tweet on this tweet basically saying, why is a Hindu kid needing to be surrounded by gods and goddesses? Can we do anything without them? What I keep trying to say is Hindu phobia is propagated. This is not an anonymous internet troll. Anybody who advocates for anything knows that, you get targeted. That's not the point here. Here, the targeting happens by an accredited professor at an institute. Ironically, I think he is at the ironically named Peace Studies Institute or something like that. He gets triggered by a young girl in her home office because this is during COVID time. So she has sent a picture of herself at her home office to her employer. Her employer has no issue with the fact that she has murtis on her desk because obviously they published a blog about her which sat on their website for 4 months. Then they used the picture from that blog in their tweet. But the presence of Hindu murtis triggers Professor Ashok Swain so much that he retweets it. And his extremely Hindu-phobic following then got into the act. And if you look at what we are seeing here, it's a sample of the hate that this young girl was subjected to for the next 24 to 48 hours, and the hate that NASA faced simply for having an employee who was somewhat visibly Hindu, everything from saying, your space programs are going to fail. Why haven't the admins reviewed it? You are at the right wing. This Hindu kid is problematic, and there was way worse. Of course, the favorite trope of caste, bringing in India. By the way, this girl happens to be a second generation kid, so her connection with India was very tenuous. But I think this was a perfect example of how Hindu phobia can hit anybody. You don't have to be an activist like me. This girl was simply doing what a lot of Indian kids, Hindu kids do, happy with in her STEM world, very excited to land an internship with NASA. But it didn't save her because simply existing as Hindu was annoying enough to others. I also want to take a minute and share, at Kona, just this December 30th, we did a panel in a Canadian, and we had about 4 or 5 Canadian university students, current university students, talk about their experience of being Hindu on campus. Again, I'm not saying their experience is everybody's experience, but this is also the slice of reality that happens on Western campuses. And this is quite literally what they shared at that event. Some of these students who spoke were, again, not even of Indian origin, because they were actually from the Caribbean. And then at some point, their families had migrated to Canada. So, probably the connection to India was lost 3 or 4 generations ago, or maybe even older. Yeah, and so they already were talking about their challenges of being Hindu when they don't really, in the West, when they don't really have a good grounding in any Indian language. But then when they try to be a practicing Hindu on campus, or they try to talk about or ask for equal treatment as Hindu students, they get targeted as being political agents of India. Again, it's a very weird situation for a child who really identifies with some totally different set of countries to be accused of being agents of India. And then when they try to organize Hindu festivals, students are told, oh, how can you celebrate X, Y, or Z festival when minorities are being oppressed in India? Now, students of no other faith have to face this question. You're allowed to celebrate any festival, because I think for the other faiths, there is an understanding that festivals are different and current political events are different. And I think in a very egregious example, at the OCAD University, there were 2 or 3 Hindu groups that had gotten together to organize a Rath Yatra. And there was a group of like some 20, 30, these standard academics and different organizations, all non-Hindu or some mostly non-Hindu, that got together and put pressure on them saying, don't call it the Rath Yatra. The Rath Yatra, quote unquote, can be an offensive term or a controversial term. So I think this is the kind of encroachment Hindus are facing in their spaces, where you find non-Hindus feeling empowered enough to come in and tell us what we need to call our festivals, asking us to change historic sacred terms, and asking us to not use, the Bhagwa Dhwaj or the Rath Yatra or whatever. So if you allow this stuff to happen, you can see very quickly how this can creep, and, pretty much anything we do can be targeted as being oppressive. This is the first time I heard that the Rath Yatra was now being considered offensive or oppressive. But, there's never a dull moment in the world when Hindu phobia happens. And if you guys think that, it's crazy that these guys were attacked for just celebrating festivals, I want to draw everyone's attention to the fact that, Holi against Hindutva has now been a part of campus life on like 20, 30 different Western campuses, I think for 3 years running straight. And again, you can have your political ideologies, you can be pro-Hindutva, anti-Hindutva. Honestly, it doesn't matter. Leave my sacred traditions alone. Holi is 5,000-6,000 years old. It has nothing to do with any current trends. And when did you last hear of Eid being targeted, or Christmas being targeted, or any festival being targeted because some people have an objection with how some people of that religion may be behaving in some part of the world? I mean, it's extreme Hindu phobia when we find ourselves unable to celebrate our festivals, or our sacred festivals come under attack simply because somebody has a political problem with some Hindu somewhere in the world. And again, these are not trolls. This, what I'm sharing here, is an article by Equality Labs, which has at this point become quite a well-known and quite a powerful organization in the West. They were basically the sponsor of laws that are now targeting us, the caste issue, which we'll talk about later at a different time. If according to these folks, if you've taken part in Holi, you've been part of an oppressive movement. And the targeting of Diwali. California has a state university system. And in one of the main state universities, UC Davis, there is an officially sponsored student body organization called Other Collective. And they put out this Instagram post, which basically said when Hindus celebrate Diwali by decorating our homes, eating sweet, bursting crackers, praying to our quote unquote casteist gods, naturally all these actions that we take are offensive to Dalits and Muslims and Bahujans and Adivasis. When I saw this Instagram post, I was just flabbergasted. I said, you know what? If you're telling me that my existence and my prayers and my decorating my own house is offensive to somebody else, that just shows the extent of hate that our community is dealing with. And I'm sorry, but if my existence is offensive to somebody, I think I refuse to stop existing just to make them happy. But these are all examples of Hindu phobia, and this is what the students who actually get together on campuses and try to do a Diwali celebration or a Rath Yatra start to face, because this is the sort of hate that is being percolated by officially sanctioned bodies and also by professors, which we won't go into today. Again, impact of Hindu phobia on real life. It's not a theoretical issue. I think in 2022, again, the summer of 22, one video went viral from the state of California where a Hindu man had walked into a Taco Bell to just pick up a fast food meal. And he just faced this 10-minute verbal assault from this guy who was like yelling at him, screaming at him, and screaming like, you dirty Hindu, you're disgusting, you need to go back, you shouldn't be out in public. Krishna Nair, that was the name of the man who got attacked, he was just frozen. He didn't understand what he had done to trigger him, trigger his attacker. And I talked to Krishna Nair later, and he said, Pushpita, I don't know what I did. What could I have done that day? And I said, you couldn't, because your experience was what most Indians, most Hindus don't realize, that there is a deep well of Hindu phobia that is around us. Many of us will walk through life without touching it, but at some points it will just erupt and catch you, and there's nothing you could have done other than, I think in Krishnan's case, the trigger point was he had ordered a vegetarian burrito. And the man who was going on and on was on and on about, I'm going to order steak. How dare you order, you enjoy your bean burrito. Really don't know why a bean burrito was so triggering to this guy. But 10-minute verbal assault, trying to spit at him a few times. It's been a year and a half almost. And unfortunately, there's still no charges against this guy. You can get away with Hindu phobia, as I keep saying. So that was a real life example. And in the virtual world, if you look at, there's a lady who who markets herself as a DEI champion in Silicon Valley. And it started out as an innocuous Twitter exchange with Vinod Khosla, I think. And they were arguing about taxes. What can be more American than that, arguing about taxes? But if a Hindu pushes back against anybody, it quickly devolves into, oh my God, you are running a caste apartheid. Fail to see really any connection between less taxes and caste apartheid. But this is the sort of thing that may be more relevant because, imagine you are having a debate in office, you're having a passionate debate about one program versus another, or a conflict. Conflicts happen. Very quickly, anything can be turned around and you can be accused of casteism or importing caste practices for anything that people want to push back against you. And I just want to point out that this is not a right-wing or a left-wing issue. Hindu hate is bipartisan. Again, from the US, we see examples of the Democratic lieutenant governor of Maryland who was targeted because she got sworn in on the Bhagavad Gita. And of course, Vivek Ramaswamy on the Republican side, who is running for election right now and is facing lots of attacks for his Hindu faith. But again, more pertinent to all of us, because we can say, well, I'm not a politician, I'm not an academic. Hindu hate, and this is where I want to go back to what the NCRI report was talking about. Remember when they talked about online hate leads to real life consequences? And it was a very prophetic report because they published it in August, and literally 2 or 3 weeks later, we saw an explosion of hate against Hindus all around the world. We saw the Leicester violence in UK. There was the Kanhaiya Lal episode in India, and in the US, we saw temples come under repeated attacks. There was a New York temple that was attacked, I think, twice in as many weeks. And a whole there was this Krishna Nair incident that I just talked about happened around that time. There were some Indian women attacked in the parking lot. So I think it's very important to realize that when you have a community that is being presented as less than fully human, as somebody that doesn't really deserve equal treatment, that they should really get by the reason of being human and by existing, you start to see a lot of problems. So we had that slew of attacks in 2022. And you've seen it continue. There've been attacks in Australia and unfortunate attacks in Canada. It's been like multiple attacks on mandirs. And now coming to California, there have been 3 attacks on California mandirs in just the last month. It's actually really shocking. And California prides itself on, being the progressive, home of diversity. And this is what's happening to mandirs there. And of course, no talk on Hinduphobia will be complete without talking about the biggest Hinduphobic hammer that is used against diaspora communities, caste. I know there's been a lot of discussion on this, so I'm going to just glance through this really quickly. But you can see that this caste issue, even though the California bill got a lot of attention, it's actually been building. And California is not the end of it. And of course, no discussion on Hinduphobia is complete without a mention of caste, because really, at least for us in the diaspora communities, caste has become one of the biggest tools to target us and really deposition us and the success that we have achieved. The California bill got a lot of press. I'm sure most people are familiar with it. But it was just one of the many incidents that have been building up to build to it. And honestly, it's not the end. We are fully expecting the issue to pop up in some other state. And we're kind of, they're not up because this has been one of the most successful ways of targeting Hindu diaspora communities. And it's the perfect example of conflating Indian socio-economic political problems onto communities that live halfway across the world. Hindus are 1 to 2% of the population in US and Canada. So to pretend that there is any way we could be replicating the issues of India, where the demographics and the dynamics are very different, into our communities there, where our experience is that of a small minority immigrant, it's just ridiculous, but that's unfortunately how it happens. And the caste tropes has been used to discriminate against Hindus very openly. So here's a press release put out by another California university, UC San Diego Ethnic Studies Department, in which they openly say that they're going to discriminate in the professors that they hire, the TAs that they hire, and the people that they give admission to. They're basically going to not give opportunities to Hindus, and they're going to give them to people of other backgrounds. That's technically against the Constitution, but so far they've been getting away with it. And I think, again, caste is a very complicated topic, especially, and caste in India is a very different issue from what caste or our lives in the diaspora is. And you don't have to take my word or the word of any Hindu organization for that. Carnegie Endowment is a very respected mainstream think tank research organization. And in 2021, they released a survey of Indian American social attitudes. And one of the topics they surveyed was caste. And you can look at the data that they showed, that how our social network gets formed, because we are primarily immigrants, right? And so you can see that when we are forming our social network, religion definitely plays a role, and so does region, because region means language. And if you want your child to learn Telugu or Tamil or Punjabi or whatever, right, the best way of that is to hang out with other Punjabi or Telugu or Bengali families. So that definitely plays a criteria. But caste is almost not a criteria at all. In fact, a full quarter of the people that they surveyed said they don't even know their caste, which totally makes sense, because if you're a child growing up in the US or Canada, you literally don't know what caste is, what your caste is, even your gotra is. So, you literally have all of these things being forced onto us. And then you have another 20 to 50% of the people who say that caste forms almost no role in the formation of my network. And barely 23% are saying that caste has anything to do with the formation of my network as an Indian American. Again, this is living in America, not India. And before everyone gets very excited and says, oh, that 23% is the casteist folks we were talking about, we should just compare how the social networks of Indian Americans are created with how the social networks of just mainstream American groups are created. And you can see that as an immigrant-heavy group, our networks are actually very diverse, whereas, a white evangelical Protestant, 80% of their network comes from their church. Or if you look at black Protestants, 82% of their network comes from church. So this desire of people to mingle with others with whom they have some kind of a shared background is not unique to Hindus or Indians, and we certainly don't need to carry any extra guilt about it. And also, not to belabor the caste issue, but if you look at a few things, what passes as allegations of caste discrimination in the US? So, being vegetarian is supposed to be a prime example of being casteist and caste discrimination, which is again very funny for people who actually know the Indian subcontinent and know that there are communities of all different socioeconomic backgrounds that are vegetarian and that are non-vegetarian. So, anyways, I could go on and on about Hindu phobia, but I know I've already talked for a while, and I'll just quickly encourage everyone to take the issue seriously and to go read up about it and to make sure that you take measures to protect yourself. Be a proud Hindu and just make sure that you know what's going on around you.
Thank you, Pushpita ji, for this wonderful presentations. I am sure our viewers have learned a lot from this. The situation is indeed dire, where the institution which should protect people are instead oppressing and discriminating against the set of people, against Hindus, we should say. So I have a couple of questions. So my first question is this the jealousy that is cropping up in Western society? Because we have seen that lately Hindu community is doing pretty well in USA, financially I would say, even though the number is very small, but the financially prosperity that they are achieving is reasonable or substantial. Or is it the iconoclasm philosophy of the Islam and to some extent Christianity as well, which is driving them for this hate against the Hindus?
Yeah, so I think there's many factors, as always. There's never a simple answer. I think there is definitely, and I think what I try to show through my Hindu phobia research is that there is an ancient hatred, especially for what the Abrahamic religions consider idolatrous religions. Hinduism is different. I think we should be proud of that difference. But in societies that are struggling to become diverse, differences also do create a pushback. And in this case, it's creating a modern pushback that taps into an ancient hatred. So there's a lot of factors at play. Then, of course, the fact that the communities are doing well, it's normal to have some level of anxiety or whatever. But I think so. There's an interplay of different factors that happens. And then, as I talked about, there is the world is in a very binary, it's being looked at in a very binary sort of position, the us versus them, the oppressor and the oppressed. So there's a desire to just slot people into certain categories, so that takes out the nuance, it takes out the humanity of the situation. And I'm no longer attacking you as Mohan or Sham or Geeta. I'm attacking the member of an oppressive class, and that dehumanizes us, and it makes it easier to attack us because it's more impersonal. So I think that is what people need to be aware of, that this stuff can happen in very innocuous looking circumstances.
Or maybe I would just add to it, it is the hypocrisy that is inherent in the Islam and Abrahamic faiths, I would say, which is driving them and making them insecure.
Well, I think it's competition between the faiths. And again, I think in general, Hindus are shy and they don't like to believe that there is such a thing. We believe in Sarva Dharma Sambhav, but everyone doesn't subscribe to that. So I think sometimes we don't quite get it because we are just saying, hey, we are happy to coexist. But sometimes you may be in a situation where, as the Diwali post I shared showed, that your existence is considered a provocation. So, as a Hindu, you have two choices, right? You either decide to completely negate your Hindu identity, or you decide to fight for your space. And when you fight for your space, which some people are doing now, inadvertently or deliberately, it creates more tension and more push. But the choice really is, are you really willing to get wiped out to make somebody else happy? That's not really a choice, I think.
So I want to ask you, though I think it cannot be answered in a small Q&A session, but I just still want to ask you, what can be the alternate tackle for this binary that is created through Marxist point of view? Because there will always be a minority, and they can always project it as that minority is being oppressed by the majority, even though it is not the case at many points in history. We have seen that now. So what can be a alternative, or how can people tackle it in this modern world? What would your thoughts?
Absolutely, and I think this is core to what Kona does, because I think when we live in a democracy, when we live in certain institutions, they are built on the assumption that you will speak for yourself. Now, we need to understand the paradigm, because yes, they are all built within the Abrahamic paradigm. But even within the Abrahamic paradigm, we need to at least start speaking up and owning our spaces and challenging when others speak for us. And so that's also where some of the conflict happens, because earlier, Hindus were very, very quiet and they would just let others speak for them. And now, over the last, 15, 20 years, we've seen baby steps, and I hope the baby steps become big steps, but we are starting to see people saying, no, you don't get to define this, or that's a wrong definition, or, even if Diwali makes you unhappy, I will celebrate it. The students we featured in our Canadian program, they did not end up changing the name of Rath Yatra, and they went ahead and celebrated a Rath Yatra, right? So somebody can say, oh, they were being but they stood their ground. And so that is very important, is speak for yourself. I can tell you, over the last 3 or 4 years, I have spoken to the offices of maybe, 50 to 100 lawmakers. And overwhelmingly, they're like, oh, wow, it's good to hear from you guys. Because when you don't tell your story, someone else will tell your story for you, right? So I think Hindus have sort of been very much focused on their day to day. I need to manage my career, and I need to have my family, and I'm managing all of these issues. I don't really see the need to go out and talk about myself or my group or my community. And that has really come back to bite us. So we really need to take steps to make sure that we embrace a Hindu identity. And I'll just give you, we talked about the bias in AI, right? It makes me a little sad, or very sad, to think about it, because how many Hindu engineers do you think were part of these teams that have created technology and created AI over the last decade or so? But when we go to work, we don't bring all of that to work. So there is a saying that is very popular in the West nowadays, which is bring your whole self to work. I don't think Hindus bring our whole selves to work. We leave our faith and our religious identity compartmentalized. We don't bring it to work. We don't bring it to school either. So, in most schools, in most colleges, and in most workplaces, you have these community based groupings, right? So, there'll be a Christian Students Association, a Muslim Students Association, and Hispanic Students Association. Rare to find a Hindu Students Association. Literally very, very rare to find. Same for workplaces, same for colleges. So if you are not even coming as a Hindu, then obviously somebody else is going to be making those decisions for you. So speak up.
So defending the Hindus here, I think I would say, because we were pushed into poverty during colonization. So we have been too much focused on garnering wealth,
Sure.
but we have not been able to create that defense that we need to do. And Kona is doing that, and it's great to know about.
Well, wealth needs to be protected, right? And you don't have to go as far back as colonization. Think about Uganda, just in the 60s, right? The community was very focused again, and I'm not blaming, because I'm part of the same, on bread and butter issues, right? But when you and then they didn't really bother to build a political presence for themselves and things, and they got thrown out of the country. So I think it's very important that when you build wealth, you also got to make sure that you are integrated into the society and you're protecting it. It's very simple, right? When you have a lovely house, you don't leave your door wide open. You take measures to protect it. You don't say, I'm a very nice person, I don't hurt anybody, so I'm not going to lock my door, because who could. So it happens at an individual level. We need to do it at a community level too. And that's only, we're not attacking anybody. In fact, a lot of times the funny thing is, when we ask for simply the exact same treatment another community gets, we are tagged with all kinds of labels. But at the core of it, if you're looking at it, all we're asking for is, give us the same treatment. And if asking for equality is considered, to be, aggressive or right wing or whatever terms you want to throw, then I think you just have to make a choice, right? Are you going to do the right thing? Because that's when it comes back to dharma. That are you going to take the easy path out and do something that is adharmic, or are you going to do the dharmic things? And it may be a little bit more work, and maybe it may create, you have to come out of your shell a little bit. But I think that is what, the Gita ka updesh was, that do the right thing, not the easy thing.
So now I want to ask you is, you have traced it from centuries, that how this Hindu phobia has been creeping in. But how much changes have social media bring in, since you have experienced it firsthand in USA? So has it made it even more prominent, or to some extent social media is helping in creating awareness as well? What is the role of social media?
I think it's both. I think in some ways, social media has, social media is a very complex term. But I think in one way it has shaken things up because it has demolished the sort of chokehold that the institutions had. And the fact that, you and I are talking today, the fact that Kohana exists today, it's basically because of social media, right? Because the mainstream media is never going to give us a platform, and they're never going to talk about our issues. And so a lot of Hindus out there sit in their little silos facing these issues and not knowing what to do. So I discovered Krishnan Iyer's horrific assault because even though we live 20 minutes away from each other, I don't know him, right? And there's like, so, but I got to know it because he had the presence of mind to record what was happening to him. He uploaded it onto YouTube. And then people started sharing that YouTube. I saw it and I'm like, oh my, this guy is like Fremont, like 20 minutes. And friend of a friend of a friend, I connected with him and then, we talked. So, and he wouldn't have gotten help in a non-social media day. So I think social media is good. Obviously, the other side also uses it. So like anything, there are pros and cons. But I think social media is good because it actually fits in with the kind of faith Hinduism is, right? We're a very organic, sort of distributed, experiential faith where everyone has a voice. We are not really like a top-down, the Pope speaks for you or the Council of Ulema speak for you. We all speak and think for ourselves. And I think in some ways, social media has been a blessing because it has allowed all of us to speak and connect with others who think like us. Of course, there's always a negative because, it allows others to target us too. But that's the reality of anything that exists.
So my last question is about the Equality Labs and the Cisco case. Is what is happening through Cisco case and what is being done by Equality Labs, is it the repetition of history, the way the Jati Varna Kula system was changed into caste system by first Portuguese then British? Is it again reimposition of that, where caste system is being imposed on Indian society or Hindu society which lives in USA, who, you as you informed us, are not even aware about their caste, but it is being imposed on them? So first I would want to you, is this imposition, how is this imposition working, and then briefly tell our viewers about Equality Labs.
That's a that's a lot. In a nutshell, I would encourage everyone to go read up. If you go to our webpage, we have kohana.org/decolonize and also kohana.org/SB403. SB403 is the California law that we just defeated. So, and the Cisco case is actually emblematic because the primary accused in that case is a self-declared atheist person. His name is Sundar Iyer, but in his, I think, 20, 30 years ago when he was doing an MBA, he basically published a blog and said, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in any organized religion, I don't believe in any of these ceremonies. And, he actually did an interview with us and he said, the guy who sued me is somebody I have known since my IIT days. So he basically said that we have eaten from the same plate, we've celebrated Diwali, we've gotten drunk together. So I think Cisco case is interesting because it summarizes a lot of the larger trends that Hindus have been subjected to for a while. It's a very complex case to discuss. I would refer people to look at our webpage. We have 2 pages dedicated to caste in the West issue. And please remember, this is strictly diaspora communities. This is not about India. And so the 2 pages are kohana.org/decolonize and kohana.org/SB403. But in a summary, the main accused in the Cisco case is a guy called Sundar Iyer, who is a self-declared atheist who said he was against all kinds of organized religion some 20, 30 years ago when he was doing his MBA. And this guy hired his batchmate, his IIT batchmate, into this position at Cisco. And he goes on to describe the relationship that this guy and the one who accused him had, saying that, they had done Diwali parties together, got drunk together, eaten from the same plate. At some point, I guess they had a falling out, and one person sued another. And I think that is what, that is what makes the caste laws so scary, because they weaponize day-to-day interactions. What has been offered as caste discrimination is just the kind of conflict you can have on a normal day. So if you're a manager and you have a team of employees, at review time, somebody's going to get a lower grade, somebody's going to get a higher grade. There is nothing stopping the person who got a poor appraisal from come back and accusing you of giving them a poor appraisal because you consider them a lower caste. The facts don't even matter. It doesn't even matter what your caste is, what their caste is. If they can always make a case that they think this was a caste discrimination issue, your life will go for a 6 for like a decade while HR and court cases and everything works their way through. Your reputation will be destroyed. Your ability to earn an economic livelihood will be destroyed. At the end of it, if you are vindicated, like Sundar Iyer has been vindicated, it still doesn't bring back all that stuff, right? I mean, Sundar Iyer can now never do what he was going to do, 5 years ago because he's permanently associated with that Cisco lawsuit, which, by the way, was ignominiously dismissed. Basically, the court said these guys had literally no case. I mean, there's some issue going on between Cisco and the thing, but these two are out of it. There was no discrimination that the state could prove at all. And so think about it. You can be a manager with a team of employees. You can be a teacher. Somebody's going to get an A, somebody's going to get a B, somebody's going to get a C. The person who gets the B or C can come back and say you did it because of caste. If you have a relationship with somebody, right, and you're going out on a second, third, fourth date, anytime you break it up, the person can say you broke it up because of caste. And these are, if I sound crazy saying all of this, I'm only quoting what has been offered in US as quote unquote evidence by the folks asking for these laws. This is not me talking. This is literally me quoting what has been offered as evidence. And people they think I'm like crazy when I say these things. And I'm like, I think it's crazy, but I'm not the one saying it. I'm just the messenger here.
So, according to you, what is the end goal of Equality Labs? What are they trying to do? I somehow struggle to understand that. Why are they doing what they are doing?
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned towards the end of my talk, caste is a old and one of the most powerful weapons to target Hindus. And Equality Labs has weaponized it very effectively, thanks to a conflation of macroeconomic factors that has come about. Elizabeth Wilkerson's book, the sort of diversity equity movement that played out in 2020, and their successful conflation of caste and race, which again makes no sense when Indians listen to it. But in the US, in the West, they have sort of made this conflation that caste is to India what race is to the US. And we said that literally makes no sense because, you can have an OBC community from North India and skin-wise, they'll be fairer than like a Tam-Bram community, right? But people don't want to listen to logic. It's the oppressor-oppressed binary. Nobody's got time to listen more than 5 seconds. And they're like, nope, you're wrong, you're oppressed. So facts really don't matter. So Equality Labs is basically looking for a way to weaponize this and to build it into law. Because see, again, as an organization, they can do whatever they want, right? The First Amendment, freedom of religion, if they want to work to demolish Hinduism, which is their stated goal, that's their right as a private organization. They can do that. The problem we have is when state-funded bodies like universities or the state itself buys into somebody's personal vendetta, right? I can say my goal is to demolish X. I have the right to do that. But if California is buying into my goal to demolish X, that's where the problem happens. So, or if the university says I'm buying into that, that's the problem. And this is basically a way to, to come after the Indian American, to come after the Hindu community, because anything you do, you can be depositioned on the basis of alleged caste discrimination. And then good luck recovering from a witch hunt that will follow, right? Maybe you will recover, maybe you won't, right? Depending on your personal circumstances. But do you really want to live your life with a Damocles sword hanging over your head, where any action you take could become a caste quote unquote action and you are guilty till you prove yourself innocent? See, that's the other problem with this whole situation, right? I make an allegation. In general, I have to prove. So the person I'm accusing is innocent till the state proves him guilty. Here the situation has been flipped. We're saying that just because of your origin, just because of your faith, or because you happen to be Indian or South Asian in origin, you are more casteist, more oppressive, and more likely to discriminate than any other human group. That is what I ask everybody who supports. I'm like, do you really think that? Because if you think that, that's very racist at its core. To say that one set of people is inherently different and worse than another set of people, that's the core of racism, right? And that's what we should never accept. In fact, when I was fighting the caste law, so many journalists asked me, they're like, why are you against this law? Do you want to discriminate? I said, of course not. Absolutely any individual who has faced discrimination, they need to file a complaint, they need to get their day in court. But I don't want the state to say that based on my birth or my religion, I come from a community that is more oppressive. Are there bad apples among us? Yes, of course. There have been bad apples among us now and through history. And, and there will be, right? Because at the end of the day, Hindus and Indian Americans are also human, and they're bad apples in every human group. What we vehemently reject is the fact that this allegation and this broad assumption that Hindus or South Asians bring quote unquote caste with them wherever they go, or they bring oppression with them more than any other group. I think that is fundamentally what we object. And what I said, we ask for equal treatment. Where if you want to start insisting that everybody's networks must reflect, then everybody's networks need to be scrutinized, not just the networks of Hindus, right? A quick look at the data showed that, while 25% of our network may be from one caste or another group has 80% of their network coming from their church. Nobody thinks that's bad. I don't think that's bad. I mean, everyone has the right to mingle with whoever they feel like, as long as we're not harming others. But with Hindus, there are all these extra guardrails being put. With Seattle, the city of Seattle, their law did pass, right? So think about the unfairness of it. The city of Seattle is going to be spending close to $200,000 a year on a person whose job it is to monitor South Asians in the city alone. I mean, that's discrimination. Not to monitor discrimination for some like specific area, but to just say, okay, I'm going to monitor South Asian businesses and South Asian people. And that, I think, is, again, it's important for people to understand the difference between Indian laws and American laws. So I know in India, there are groups that are considered, that have different rights or whatever. That is absolutely not the case in the US. The Constitution treats everybody equally. So I'll give gender as an example. So in India, there is the Violence Against Women Act, right? Which is specifically against women. But in US, it's only gender. So a man can sue a woman for, saying I was discriminated based on gender, and a woman can sue a man. So it's both ways. And so when they are trying to pass these caste laws in the US, they're fundamentally trying to change the way laws are created in the US. Again, this is important because Indians living in India have a different framework, but we are Americans living in America.
So discriminating and taking away fundamental rights of a set of people cannot be called equality after.
Absolutely not. And the other problem with the California lawsuit, the Cisco lawsuit, was that the state started to define what it meant to be a Hindu, which is a fundamental violation of the separation of church and state. Right? The state has no business defining what it means to be a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew. It's just not, it's just something they're supposed to stay out.
It's not their job.
It's not their job. It's actually definitely something that the Constitution does not allow them to do.
With that, we'll end this session. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Pushpita ji.
Thank you. Namaste. Wonderful to be here.